Hey everyone, today is Tuesday, October 25th, 2022, and today we're going to be talking specifically about the United States Senate elections for the 2022 midterms. This video is going to upload on Wednesday, so if you're watching this and you're thinking, oh, it's October 26th, just remember I filmed this on October 25th, and I wanted to make sure that that was clear. So today we're officially 2 weeks out from Election Day, and there's some recent polls and a lot of different things that we're going to look at in these Senate races that are going to decide who controls the Senate. The first thing that I want to point out is since my last video, the margin of the Republicans having a chance of winning the Senate has grown pretty largely, honestly. The Republicans have a 46% chance of winning the Senate to the Democrats' 54%. It's a dead heat for the Senate at this point in time. And there's many reasons for this if we look specifically down here, and we're going to talk about specifics more later on in the video, but we see Nevada is more likely to go to exalt now. We also see states like Pennsylvania getting closer, Georgia inching closer since what happened just a couple of weeks ago with Herschel Walker and a scandal coming out about Roe v. Wade and abortion. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start this video like we do every other video, characterizing states that are going to be pretty solid for the Democratic Party. And doing that will give us a general idea of where we're at with these races and give us a general sense of the states that need to be picked up by Republicans. So Utah is actually one, not Colorado, but Utah is actually one that we can't characterize as that just yet. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But we can't necessarily characterize it as a state that's going to be largely in favor of the Republican Party just because of the simple fact of having Evan McConnell on the ticket in Utah for the Senate. Obviously, that wouldn't be a Democratic win, and I don't even believe that Evan McConnell will win, but I do believe that this margin will be a little bit closer than maybe previously expected in a race like in Utah. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the fact that Evan McConnell is probably going to perform better than a Democrat would in Utah. Given that Mike Lee probably will still win, and I'm going to characterize it more on a likely level, and I do think there's still a very high possibility that he outperforms that because right now he's roughly up about 13 percentage points. So roughly in that, if polls are correct, then Mike Lee is going to be in that likely Republican column instead of a full solid red column. Obviously, he could win on a solid level, but I'm just not sure how accurate that would be in predicting that. But the next state that we're going to talk about is the state of Colorado. And if we look at Colorado, we see that Michael Bennet is just expected to win. I mean, if we're looking at the poll numbers and multiple different things, he's up by roughly 8 percentage points, and that's a pretty solid victory for him, and we'll characterize that as a pretty likely Democratic state in the state of Colorado. The next state, though, that we're going to talk about is Iowa. Solid red state, and if we look at polling, roughly Chuck Grassley is at 56.8% in the forecast vote share to Michael Franklin's 43.2%. So ultimately, this race could come down to the wire, but I do think, well, not necessarily come down to the wire, I should reword that, but it could necessarily be one that Chuck Grassley may not win by a huge margin, by over 15 percentage points. But I do think that that's still pretty likely that he does, even though I am going to, obviously for obvious reasons, we're going to look more in depth on this race as we continue through the next couple of weeks. Polling recently, if we go to this, we have seen that Grassley has gotten some more necessarily closer polls. We see that he was up by 3% in this poll, but the one that's most recently done, he was up by 11%. Obviously, I still think Grassley's going to win. I think that that's obviously pretty expected. But, the margin of that could be closer than expected, should I say. So I'll go ahead and characterize that as a likely Republican state in the state of Iowa. The next state, though, that we're going to talk about is the state of New Hampshire. And if we look at New Hampshire, this is a state that I think the Democrats will win pretty solidly. Maggie Hassan is just expected to win. I mean, this race is going to be much closer than previously expected, just a month or two ago. Obviously, Republicans are starting to perform better in polls and a multitude of reasons. And New Hampshire could be a very close race. But at this point, polling and multiple other things suggest that this race is going to be a pretty decent win for the Democratic Party. I'm going to say that Maggie Hassan does win this race, and I know polling narrowly says that she'll win it by a likely Democratic margin, but I just don't know that I believe that fully. I think lean is an okay place to put that. Anywhere under 5 percentage points. I think that is realistically where we're at with that race. The next state, though, that we're going to talk about is the state of Florida. And if we look at Florida, Marco Rubio is expected to win. This shouldn't be a shocker to anybody, and Marco Rubio is pretty popular in the state of Florida, or somewhat popular enough to be reelected. He's running with Ron DeSantis as for governor, obviously, and that's going to maybe also boost those numbers as well. But I do believe Marco Rubio will win the state by a pretty likely scale for the Republican Party. The next state, though, that we're going to talk about is the state of Ohio. If we look at Ohio, we see that J.D. Vance is performing pretty well. If we go specifically into this, recent polls say that it's even. There was one by showed them even, both at 46%. The most recent one done, Vance up by a percentage point. Vance up 4, 2, 3, Ryan up 2, but that was just over a week ago. So obviously, J.D. Vance is expected to win. The margin is a little tricky to get by, but I do believe that J.D. Vance will probably win this race. I'm going to say it's probably going to be a likely Republican race, and just for simple factors of the way Trump won it in 2016 and 2020, I believe that this race is pretty okay to call a likely Republican race. The next state, though, that we're going to talk about is the state of Wisconsin. If we look at Wisconsin, I believe Ron Johnson is expected to win by a pretty solid margin. Obviously, Mandela Barnes is still in this race, and it could flip, but obviously right now, Ron Johnson is in the best case right here in the state of Wisconsin. I don't know that I can go as far as to sit here and say that Ron Johnson's going to win this by a likely Republican scale, but I do believe it'll be more of a lean Republican scale, and I think that's fair to characterize this race as. We're also going to talk about the state of North Carolina. Ted Budd performing very well in the state, and he's expected to win, and I'm going to say by a likely Republican margin. This race doesn't need a whole lot of talking about. If we look at polling and multiple other things in this race, it's just expected that Budd wins. It's just expected that he does. The next state, though, that we will talk about is the state of Arizona. If we look at Arizona and we look at polling in Arizona, we can look specifically, give me 1 second to get to Arizona's numbers. I have them pulled up. Blake Masters has a 26% chance of winning. And if we look at recent polls, Kelly is up by 2, 1, 3, 3, 3, 3, 4. And if we look at that, it gives us a final vote share of Mark Kelly winning by around roughly 2 to 3 percentage points. So a pretty solid victory for Mark Kelly if this remains true. The thing that I think is a little interesting is if we go to 2020 Arizona Senate race, we can see that this race actually was one in which Mark Kelly won by around 2 to 3 percentage points. And if we go down to polling and a multitude of other things, this race showed that Mark Kelly was up by 5.7 percentage points, 5 percentage points, an average of 5.4 percentage points. But he didn't win by that. So if we look at average polling now, if we go back to this average polling now, this race would be in Blake Masters' favor. Do I believe that? No. I do believe that Mark Kelly still will win, but I do find that interesting. It's something that we should point out in this race. I do believe Mark Kelly will win this race by a lean Democratic scale. I don't think it's going to be likely. I don't think he'll win it by over 5 percentage points. I just don't, especially when we characterize these other 3 states that are remaining. The next state that we're going to talk about is the state of Nevada. And normally this is the last state that I talk about because it's been a closer race, and it still is very close. I'm not going to discharacterize that at all. But I do believe that this race has flipped since we last talked about it. If we look at it, obviously, we see that Laxalt is up. Catherine Cortez Masto has been up in polling. Don't get me wrong on that. She has been up. But if we look at an overall polling average, Laxalt has been up. And I believe it. I believe he'll win it, and I think it'll be narrow. I really do think it'll be pretty narrow, but I do believe that Laxalt will win it. As far as the margin, it's a little hard to characterize. I could sit here and say it's going to be a tilt margin, or I could sit here and say it's going to be a lean margin. At this point, I think it'll be a lean margin, especially when we start talking about Pennsylvania and Georgia. I'm sorry about that. But I do believe that it will be a pretty solid victory for the GOP in Nevada. The next state, though, that we're going to talk about is the state of Pennsylvania. And this race has tightened so much since we last talked about it. John Fetterman struggling on his issues. Mehmet Oz really focusing on crime and tying John Fetterman to crime. If we look at this, though, John Fetterman is still up in polling. There's no doubt behind that at all. But I do believe that this race is very, very, very close. The last poll that we've seen that Oz was expected to win in was just a couple of weeks ago, and Oz was up by 5 percentage points by a Wick pollster. Every other poll has had Fetterman up by 1 or 2 percentage points since then. And while I buy it to a certain extent, I do believe that this race is going to be very close. I really do. I think this is going to be one of the closest races of the election cycle. And I think there's a multitude of reasons in that, but I do believe that Fetterman is going to have to really focus on the next couple of weeks to win this. He has a debate actually tonight, the night that I'm filming this. Probably should have waited and filmed this tomorrow, the day that it'll upload, but I'm going to be quite busy tomorrow, so I'm not going to be able to do that. But tonight's debate's really going to show us where Fetterman is, and I think that will really flip the coin. If Oz is going to win this, he's going to have to perform well in tonight's debate, and I believe he will. Honestly, I really do. I believe Oz will perform pretty well in tonight's debate against Fetterman, especially considering the closed captioning and a multitude of other reasons with Fetterman. He's just, if I could say it, not the best debater. And it was expected for a while that he wasn't even going to debate, which I think would have hurt his campaign. But ultimately, I do believe this race is going to be close. There's no denying it, and I can't help but characterize this as a Democratic win right now. I do believe it's going to be very narrow. I believe under a percentage point at this point, I believe that Oz really has a chance of winning this race, to be honest. But the next state that we'll have to talk about is the state of Georgia. And this is going to decide Senate control. It's either going to be a 50-50 split and the Democrats control Senate, or the Republicans are able to flip this state and characterize that for Pennsylvania. And ultimately, if they can win this, then they've got it in the bag. Now, here's the problem with Raphael Warnock is I think if the Republicans don't win Pennsylvania, but they do win Nevada, I think if this goes to a runoff like I have expected it to for the past, few months now, I've expected this race will go to a runoff and predicted that. I believe that the Republicans really are going to focus on the race. Like, I think they're going to spend a lot of money on it, and I think that ultimately Walker would come out ahead if he does have to go to a runoff. And ultimately, these numbers show that he will. 49.7%. He has to get over 50% of the vote to not characterize for a runoff. I think right now that's not expected to do. If we look at polling, Warnock has been trailing more so in recent polls. He's only got a 53% chance of winning at this point. And I do believe that if this goes to a runoff like these forecasted vote shares say it will, then I do believe that Herschel Walker will win this race. And I do believe it'll be narrow. Don't get me wrong, it will be very narrow. But I can't necessarily characterize this as a tilt Republican race for the simple fact of if it goes to a runoff and Walker does win it, I don't believe it'll be under a percentage point. So this is my final prediction. I believe Georgia goes to a runoff and Walker ultimately ends up winning that by a pretty narrow margin. But I do believe he wins it because the GOP puts in a lot of money in the race. So this is my final prediction. I'd love to know y'all's thoughts down below as well. I know y'all are going to disagree on Georgia. I've heard your comments before on this race, and don't get me wrong. I do believe that Warnock still has a very favorited chance, but I just do believe that if this goes to a runoff, the Republicans really are going to spend a lot of money on this race to win it. So thank you all again so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts down below on Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada, even states like Wisconsin, Arizona, New Hampshire, and Ohio, even North Carolina. I'd love to know your thoughts. Let me know down below, and I will see you all in the next video. Don't forget to get out and vote on or before Election Day. Most early early voting states have already opened their ballots, so if you want to get out and vote early, go ahead and do that. Just make sure that your voice is heard. Thank you all so much again for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.